First off, a happy belated Thanksgiving to all of you who watch my videos in Canada. Now, this video is a little longer than usual, but I promise you, well worth it. In case you missed it, a monumental development in the COVID-19 saga broke on Friday last week. The science-denying state of Florida issued an advisory, but not just any old advisory. They are now recommending against the COVID injections for all men under 40 years old. Now, before you think it's April 1st, it isn't. Florida's Department of Health's new guidance is based on their own analysis of the mortality risk following the injections. Florida employed an evidence-based technique called the self-controlled case study, which was originally developed for evaluating vaccine safety. Now, before we go any further, let's consider how game-changing that one fact is alone. First off, in over 2 years, Florida is the first and only state to conduct a study of vaccine safety, period. Have you heard of any other state, province, and/or country doing so? For those of you who believe your vote doesn't matter, elections have consequences. First off, this would not have happened without Governor DeSantis being in power. Second, him having the courage to appoint a heavyweight, highly credentialed intellect like Harvard-trained Dr. Joseph Ladapo as the state Surgeon General. For those of you who didn't know it, Dr. Ladapo was a part of the original America's Frontline Doctors. Next important fact, for all you critics of DeSantis, did you know that the Federal Centers for Disease Control, with a budget larger than some countries' annual gross domestic product, has never studied injection outcomes? They're not alone, though. In the US, neither has the FDA or the NIH. Canadian agencies? Forget about it. Of course, given the insanity we've just lived through over the past 2.5+ years, you would have thought that these agencies would naturally have been drilling down on vaccine safety from the very first injection. You know, follow the science? Nope, crickets, folks. But not to worry, Florida to the rescue. With one move, Governor DeSantis has just likely shattered the gigantic bulletproof glass wall protecting Pfizer and Moderna from accountability. There's no doubt that this new guidance will certainly affect injection uptake. But the monster implication of this is that this new guidance now constitutes a state-sanctioned finding that the injections are not completely safe and effective. Not my words, state of Florida, YouTube. The legal system and judges will be left with little choice but to pay attention to this. Here's what Florida's analysis found. Again, YouTube, not my words. There's an 84% increase in the relative incidence of cardiac-related death among males 18 to 39 years old within 28 days following mRNA vaccination. With a high level of global immunity to COVID-19, the benefit of vaccination is likely outweighed by this abnormally high risk of cardiac-related death among men in this age group. Males over the age of 60 had a 10% increased risk of cardiac-related death within 28 days of mRNA vaccination, while non-mRNA vaccines were not found to have these increased risks among any population. Abnormally high risk? In other words, according to the government-sanctioned report, males 18 to 39 were almost twice as likely to die after getting the injection. On a side note, the analysis didn't even consider non-fatal vaccine-related injuries. Finally, the one-page guidance expanded the state's previous recommendation from March against vaccinating children for COVID, now including infants and toddlers. Florida now recommends against injecting any kids regardless of age. Again, Florida, YouTube, not me. Let's talk about all the implications and fallout thus far. First, corporate media has been doing their utmost to ignore the story because that's got to be bad for bad news. I don't know. news that doesn't support the current talking point and which can't easily be discredited. Memory hole it and just pretend like it didn't happen. On Sunday, in order to deal with it, true to form, Twitter jailed as misinformation Friday's tweet by Florida Surgeon General Dr. Joseph Ladapo, wherein he made the announcement about Florida's new guidance advising against vaccination for males under 40, citing drastically high rates of cardiac death following the injections. But this time, keeping it in jail proved to be far more formidable. Why? Well, you can imagine what people were saying. Ladapo is a state official. His agency's guidance is official government information. Who is Twitter to decide that official government information is now misinformation? Who died and made Twitter king shit of the world? Not backing down, Florida asked Twitter to explain themselves. Then, wouldn't you know it, by the end of the day Sunday, without explanation, Twitter unjailed Dr. Ladapo's official tweet. That's a win, folks. The main reason corporate media cannot follow the usual path of criticizing Florida's analysis for not being peer-reviewed or using the right data or being politically motivated or whatever they choose to sling at it is because Florida is a state government. Media can't just call the guidance an outlier. To thoroughly discredit the guidance, they'll have to do all their usual stuff, plus, and here's the key, counter back with opposing research proving conclusively using evidence that the injections reduce mortality, which they can't. They can't produce that research. Why do I say that? Simple. Because the research doesn't exist, and everybody that's in the know knows it. Next, this does wonders for full medical disclosure. How so? Well, unlike media, doctors and healthcare institutions now cannot ignore the new guidance because they must follow best practices to get their COVID liability protection. And now Florida has officially just established a new best practice or standard of care cited as follows. Based on current available data, patients should be informed of the possible cardiac complications that can arise after receiving a mRNA COVID-19 vaccine. Voila! The new best practice requires all patients to be informed of cardiac complications before they receive a COVID injection. Now, kids and men under 40 must be told that the state recommends against the injections. Before injecting patients, pharmacies, doctors, nurses, and every other healthcare professional in Florida will now have to inform people of the cardiac risk, or their liability shields may disappear like monkeypox. Now in Florida, all patients, men and women, regardless of age, who are confronted by doctors insisting on injections can now simply present Florida's new guidance and insist that the doctors produce evidence-based information to the contrary. Boom, mic drop. Now even though this impacts the residents of Florida, there's nothing stopping the rest of us who live elsewhere from using this guidance. Why? Because there's no opposing evidence apart from dire warnings and anecdotal stories by government and public health officials. This guidance can be used by anyone being pressured to get the injections. All they have to say is, I have some family history of cardiac problems, so I've done a risk versus benefit analysis, and I don't think the risk is justified in my case. End of story. The other fallout from this, which will be interesting to follow, is on the judicial side. I'm certain that there are lawyers in Florida saying, finally, I've got ammunition and a starting point in my case. In closing, I can't say enough what good news this is, and no matter how hard they try, the powers that be will not be able to fully suppress it. To discredit it or defend against it, they will have to produce reliable, credible, and fact-based evidence contradicting it, which is not something they ever wanted to do. No longer will Take our word for it. Be good enough when it comes to the safety question. I know it takes much longer. It's taken much longer than any of us would have wanted. But be rest assured, folks, there's no putting this genie back in the bottle now. Go, Florida, go. Anyway, thanks for watching. I do appreciate it. Please post any comments you have in the comment section. You can also follow me on my Rumble, on my Locals account, especially if this video gets taken down. That's where you'll find it. Thanks. We'll see you next time.